Welcome to another episode of the Institute for Conflicts Individuation Podcast. The IFC's Individuation Podcast. I should say it that way because that's the title. So today we are on chapter 2 of Mary Louise von Franz's Archetypal Symbols and Fairytales in the first book of her collected works. And we're going to be discussing two fairy tales today. Flight to the Moon. Lisa Hung is going to read the story to us, and then we will go into analysis. The other story is The Mountain of the Golden Queen. And Eric will be reading that one, and we will get into that one. So what we understood from last week's podcast was that in fairy tales, the two realms meet: the earthly realm and the spiritual realm. The profane meets the spiritual. So, or as von Franz says, the profane meets the magical. So today we're going to start with Lisa. Lisa, do you want to hit us with the story?
Sure.
Hit us with that tune.
Here we go. Where's my intro song? I'm going to read you a story called Flight of the Moon. It is originated from an Inuit story. Inuits relate to lots of First Nations people. We're specifically in the area of the Baffin Island, which is, think of the same latitude as Greenland, just over Canada, the big island up there, way up in the Northeast Islands up there. So here we begin. Flight of the Moon. A mighty Onkakok, who had a bear as his Tornok, resolved to pay a visit to the moon. So let me explain what these two characters are. The Onkakok is a religious shaman, and this is a shaman who is known to interact with the spirit world. And a Tornok is a word for an animal spirit guardian or helper, typically in the form of a polar bear. And they are neither good nor bad. They can bring blessings and harm. They usually come in both a human form and a bear form. So we were talking about a shaman and a animal spirit guardian. So let's begin again. A mighty Onkakok, who had a bear as his Tornok, resolved to pay a visit to the moon. He sat down in the rear of his hut, turning his back towards the lamps, which had been extinguished. He had his hands tied up and thongs fastened around his knees and neck. Thus prepared, he summoned his Tornok, which carried him rapidly through the air and brought him to the moon. He observed that the moon was a house, nicely covered in white deerskin, that the man inside the moon used to dry nearby. On each side of the entrance was the upper portion of an enormous walrus, which threatened to tear in pieces any bold intruder. Though it was dangerous to pass by the fierce animals, the Onkakok, with the help of his Tornok, succeeded in entering the house. In the passage, he saw the only dog of the man of the moon, which is called Tiang and is dappled white and red. On entering the main room, he perceived on the left side a small additional building in which a beautiful woman, the sun, was sitting before her lamp. As soon as she saw the Onkakok enter, she blew on her fire and quickly hid behind the blaze. The man in the moon came to meet him kindly, stepping from the seat on the ledge and bidding the stranger welcome. Behind the lamps, great heaps of venison and seal meat were piled up, but the man of the moon did not yet offer him anything. He said, "My wife," I cannot say her name, "will soon enter and we will perform a dance. Mind that you do not laugh, else she will split your belly with a knife, take out your intestines, and give them to my ermine, which lives in yon house outside. Before long, a woman entered carrying an oblong vessel containing her ulo. An ulo is a very utilitarian practical knife, a multi-tool. She put it on the floor and stooped forward, turning the vessel like a whirligig. Then she commenced dancing, and when she turned her back towards the oncocock, it was made manifest that she was hollow. She had no back, backbones, or entrails, but only lungs and heart. The man joined her dance, and their attitudes and grimaces looked so funny that the oncocock could hardly keep from laughing. But just at the right moment, he called to mind the warnings of the man in the moon and rushed out of the house. The man cried after him. He warned him, "Provide yourself with your large white bear, Tarnok," and thus he escaped unhurt. Reinvigorated, the oncocock returned for another visit and succeeded in mastering his inclination to laugh, and was hospitably received by the man after the performance was finished. The man of the moon showed him all around the house and let him look into a small additional building near the entrance. There, the visitor saw large herds of deer apparently roaming over vast plains. The man of the moon allowed him to choose one animal, which fell immediately through the hole down upon the earth. In another building, he saw a profusion of seals swimming in an ocean and was allowed to pick out one of these also. At last, the man of the moon sent him away, and his Tornok carried him back to his hut as quickly as he had left it. During his visit to the moon, his body had lain motionless and soulless, but now it revived. The tongs which his hands had been fastened had fallen down, though they had been tied in firm knots. The oncocock felt almost exhausted, and when the lamps were relighted, he related his adventures during the flight to the moon to the eagerly listening men. And that is the story of the flight to the moon.
Okay, so it's a little complicated because we had to explain several words and meanings to those words. Do you want to do a short summary of it?
Sure, I can do a short summary. A shaman wanted to visit the man on the moon in the spirit world, and he summoned his spirit animal, a Tornok, to carry him there. In preparation to do that in his earthly form, he was tied up and in the back of his hut, and his Tarnok met him there and took him there. When he met the man on the moon, he was not greeted or welcomed immediately, but he was warned, "You must behave this way," and the way was to not insult his wife, the sun, and should you insult him, then she will gut you. And he almost laughed at her because their dance, the moon and the sun's dance, was foreign to him, and it made him laugh. But he escaped before he actually ridiculed his host. And he came back with his Tarnok to the man on the moon and started the welcome process over again. And this time he was welcomed. And he succeeded in not laughing at the initial dance. And then he was welcomed with food and gifts of bounty. And at that visit, then he went back home and told his story about having met them. Is that
Great.
Did I get it all?
I think so. So the story goes is that the shaman, to travel to the spirit world and meet the man in the moon, the shaman had to be tied up. Usually what happens is, as we saw in our first fairy tale, Help in Need, the general falls asleep, and thus the princess comes while he's sleeping. So to enter the unconscious, you have to be unconscious. You're either going through sleep, or you go into a cave, or you dive into water, or you pass out, or you go on a journey and then find out you were sleeping and it was a dream. So the shaman knows that to reach this person, he would have to be completely still to reach the man in the moon. Otherwise, he would not be welcomed into the spirit world. So there are rules in the spirit world of how we can approach the characters and figures in the spirit world. So we also see that in this fairy tale, there's several animals. Um, there's a seal, there's a walrus, uh, there is a bear,
And a dog.
and there's a dog. There's
And a deer.
the deer, and the sun and the moon, and um, there's a house in the story. So when the shaman goes, he goes to the house of the man in the moon. So the house would be the moon, symbolically. So he would be inside the moon. So the house would be inside the moon. It wouldn't be outside the moon. It wouldn't sit symbolically on the outside. It would sit inside. So the fairy tale, the world of fairy tales is an inner world. It's not an external world. And that is told through the story. The person who's invited to go to these places is a shaman, healer, medicine woman or man who helps the village by curing them from disease and illness. So in our first fairy tale, the fairy tale is about a meeting. The shaman needs something from the man in the moon. Probably he needs properties for his medicines. So the man in the moon offers him two things. He offers him a deer, and he also offers him a seal. So he gets to pick an animal that lives in the water and an animal that lives on land to take with him. So that's where we start with our story. Why is he going? What is the purpose of his trip? Why does he need the bear? So the animal spirits, the animal guardian spirits, are conscious in the unconscious. They have personalities. They have ideas. They have thoughts. They speak. So that's our first fairy tale. In the dream process, the fairy tale takes us into the depth of the symbolic world, the spiritual world, the world where what it looks like does not mean it is that. So whatever it looks like, it's not really that. He says it's a house, but the sun lives in it. Well, it's very difficult to get the sun into a house, but so symbolically, there's a house. The sun sits in the corner, and then the sun is shy. She hides when he walks in. She hides behind her own fire. So these nuanced ways of telling the story of how to connect to these characters, these are symbolic characters. And what do we know of the moon? The moon controls the currents. It also controls the planting cycles. The sun gives us energy. The sun helps the plants to grow. So these are the two characters that he is requesting help from. And this is their symbolic aspect. So, Eric, why don't you tell us the second fairy tale, and then we will start to analyze both fairy tales in terms of symbolism and how they intertwine or they don't. how they are
Okay.
very different.
Sure thing. Um, this fairy tale is a Nordic one. It's from the Nordic world, and it is called The Mountain of the Golden Queen. Once upon a time, a lad who tended the cattle in the wood was eating his noontide meal in a clearing in the forest. As he was sitting there, he saw a rat run into a juniper bush. His curiosity led him to look for it, but as he bent over, down he went, head over heels, and fell asleep. And he dreamed that he was going to find the princess on the Mount of the Golden Queen, but that he did not know the way. The following day, he once more pastured his cattle in the wood. When he came to the same clearing, he again ate his dinner there. And again he saw the rat and went to look for it. And again, when he bent down, he went head over heels and fell fast asleep. And again he dreamed of the princess on the Mount of the Golden Queen, and that in order to get her, he would need 70 pounds of iron and a pair of iron shoes. He awoke and it was all a dream. But by now he had made up his mind to find the Mount of the Golden Queen, and he went home with his herd. On the third day, when he let out his cattle, he could not reach the clearing of his happy dream too soon. Again, the rat showed itself, and when he went to look for it, he fell asleep as he had done each preceding day. And again he dreamed of the princess on the Mount of the Golden Queen, and that she came to him and laid a letter and a band of gold in his pocket. Then he awoke, and to his indescribable surprise, he found in his pocket both of the things of which he had dreamed, the letter and the band. Now he had no time to attend to the cattle any longer, but drove them straight home. Then he went into the stable, he let out a horse and sold it and bought 70 pounds of iron and a pair of iron shoes with the money. He made the thole pins out of the iron, put on his iron shoes, and set forth. Now, for those who don't know what a thole pin is that little bracket that's on the side of a boat that hold the oars, made out of metal, that support the oars on a boat. For a time he traveled by land, but at last he came to the lake which he had to cross. He saw naught but water before him and behind him, and rowing so long and steadily that he wore out one thole pin after another. He at length reached land and a green meadow where no trees grew. He walked all around the meadow and at last found a mound of earth from which smoke was rising. When he looked more closely, out came a woman who was 9 yards long. He asked her to tell him the way to the Mount of the Golden Queen, but she replied, "That I do not know. Go ask my sister, who is 9 yards taller than I am, and who lives in an earth mound which you can find without any trouble." So he left her and came to a mound of earth that looked just like the first, and from which smoke was also rising. A woman at once came out who was tremendously tall, and of her he asked the way to the Mount of the Golden Queen. "That I do not know," she said. "Go ask my brother, who is 9 yards taller than I am and who lives in a hill just a little further away." So he came to the hill from which smoke was also rising, and knocked. A man at once came out who was a veritable giant, for he was 27 yards in length. and of him he asked the way to the Mount of the Golden Queen. Then the giant took a whistle and whistled in every direction to call together all the animals to be found on the earth. And all the animals came from the woods, foremost among them a bear. The giant asked him about the Mount of the Golden Queen, but he knew nothing of it. Again, the giant blew his whistle in every direction to call together all the fishes to be found in the waters. They came at once, and he asked them about the Mount of the Golden Queen, but they knew nothing of it. Once more the giant blew his whistle in every direction and called together all the birds of the air. They came, and he asked the eagle about the Mount of the Golden Queen and whether he knew where it might be. The eagle said, "Yes." "Well, then take this lad there," said the giant, "but do not treat him unkindly." This the eagle promised, allowed the youth to seat himself on his back, and then off they went through the air over fields and forest, hill and dale, and before long they were above the ocean and could see nothing but sky and water. Then the eagle dipped the youth in the ocean up to his ankles and asked, "Are you afraid?" "No," said the youth. Then the eagle flew on a while, and again dipped the youth in the water up to his knees. And he said, "Are you afraid?" "Yes," answered the youth. But the giant said, "You were not to treat me unkindly." "Are you really afraid?" asked the eagle once more. "Yes," answered the youth. Then the eagle said, "The fear you now feel is the very same fear I felt when the princess thrust the letter and the golden band into your pocket." And with that, they reached a large, high mountain, in one side of which was a great iron door. They knocked, and a servant maid appeared to open the door and admit them. The youth remained and was well received, but the eagle said farewell and flew back to his native land. The youth asked for a drink, and he was at once handed a beaker containing a refreshing draught. When he had emptied it, and returned the beaker, he let the golden band drop into it. And when the maid brought back the beaker to her mistress, who was the princess of the Mount of the Golden Queen, the latter looked into the beaker, and behold, there lay a golden band, which she recognized as her own. So she asked, "Is there someone here?" And when the maid answered in the affirmative, the princess said, "Bid him come in." And as soon as the youth entered, she asked him if he chanced to have a letter. The youth drew out the letter he had received in so strange a manner and gave it to the princess. And when she had read it, she cried, full of joy, "Now I am delivered." And at that very moment, the mountain turned into a most handsome castle with all sorts of precious things, servants, and every sort of convenience, each for its own purpose. Now, whether the princess and the youth married, the story does not say, yet we must take for granted that a wedding is the proper end for the fairy tale. The end.
Okay. So in this tale, the world announces itself to the hero through three dreams, which are linked to the appearance of the rat. So the rat, or rats, like mice, are animals that live in dark underground and therefore embody the unconscious. Animals that live in the dark underground therefore embody the unconscious animalistic impulses in the humans. So they represent the unconscious in humanity. The premonition of the mountain of the Golden Queen comes to the young herdsman. So this guy, he herds cattle. He's sleeping in the meadow. Again, he falls asleep. To travel to the spirit world, you cannot be conscious. You're traveling through the unconscious. That's always going to be the case, that they either fall asleep, fall under a spell, take a magic potion, take a poison, wake up from a dream, wake up from fairy tale, wake up from the story. So later, the relation to the magical world changes. It arises not through falling asleep, but rather through a long journey over lakes and oceans. The same linking of motifs, falling asleep, sinking at the same time, finds oneself in a foreign realm. So every time the eagle dipped him in the water and asked him if he was afraid. Why was he asking him if he was afraid? Because to gain the knowledge of the unconscious, you must travel through the unconscious. He was not aware where he was traveling. The eagle was showing him the route. The eagle was showing him something he needed to see. He could not see. He could not experience. That's why the first time he dips him in, he asked him if he's scared. He says no, but he doesn't get why he dipped him. The second time he dips him up to his knees. Then he asks him again if he's afraid. This time he answers in the affirmative. Then the eagle starts to tell him about the task of the band. There is something that needs to be done with the band that the herdsman does not understand yet. And when he drops the band into the beer, he still hasn't figured out what he's supposed to do. All he wants to do is find the princess. So, in Lisa's story, the moon so in Lisa's story, the symbolism of the moon and the sun and how they relate to us as earthly bound humans, how they relate to us in our imagination, how they relate to us in storytelling. These stories tell us of how we are one with nature. These stories tell us how we are one, that there's a bridge between the conscious world and the unconscious world. And the unconscious world, usually to cross the bridge, you need some form of sleep, potion. Basically, it's an absence of consciousness. With the absence of consciousness, we come to see and hear and talk to different spirits. These spirits are animal spirits. In Lisa's dream, there's several animal spirits. They're guardian spirits. So their job is on the planet that this also tells of how they see the animals. There's respect to the animal world. The animal world is very important to them. And it protects them. It protects them in the conscious world. That the spiritual animals or spiritual guardians protect them in our waking world, our conscious world. So the shaman is telling a story. The shaman is telling his people a story about the sun and the moon, a fairy tale about the sun and the moon, about the man in the moon, about his wife, the sun. He's telling them a story. What is the purpose of the story? He's telling them a story to get them closer to their own spirit. He is healing spirit. The story is of healing spirit, of knowing to respect spirit. Because what does the man on the moon say to him? Say, do not offend my wife. She is very easily offended. In the spirit world, we have to respect the spirits and respect how the spirits are. We cannot project onto them that which we need them to be. What are your thoughts, Lisa, on the fairy tale? Once Lisa takes off her mute button, then we will be able to hear her.
Thank you. uh, yes, but respecting it's even though it might be a reflection of your own house, you are still a guest. You are a guest. You respect your host. You respect the protocols. There also seem to be protocols or expected routines or behaviors in order to access or be welcomed into the spirit world. These are observations.
And to be gifted from the spirit world, because he wanted things from the spirit world. He wanted a deer from the spirit world. He wanted the seal from the spirit world. He wanted gifts from the spirit world to take back with him. So there is a protocol for that. The same thing with the other fairy tale. There's a protocol. To get from point A to point B, there's a protocol. And you have to learn the protocol first. If you don't know what the protocol is, you can't stumble upon it. So the herdsman sleeps, I think, 3 nights. He comes and goes over and over again to figure out what the protocol is, what he's dreaming of. What is it real? Is it not real? It takes him a while to figure out that it's real, that there's a journey ahead. Eric, what are your thoughts about the second fairy tale?
Well, the same thing that this is a little bit stereotypical, but it's a stereotype that turns out to be a true one, and that is native peoples, regardless of what part of the world they're in, native peoples that grew up and have lived for hundreds and even thousands of years in a particular place. The Aleutians and the Yupik or Inuits in Alaska, they've been there for 4,000 or 5,000 years at least, because we know they've been separated that long from one another's culture. But Native Americans, other Native Americans throughout our country and throughout other countries, Australia, whatever, they all have this incredible connection to not only animals, but the plants and any substance that grows in their world, in their environment. And I love it where Marie von Franz said, one may not simply state that this is a separation of body and spirit, talking about how they have to go to sleep or be unconscious to experience the spiritual world. She said, and although I agree with you, I don't like the word primitive. She said the primitive world or ancient world would reject such a divisional description. So here we are, these modern day scientific, great learned people, and the people who grew up hundreds and thousands of years ago have a better understanding. This is just my opinion, have a better understanding of how, as Jung has completely talked about, and you've talked about many times, Dr. Lahab, that they're not in opposition. They're a part of the same thing. They're compensatory. They work together. The ancient world, and Lisa summed it up beautifully last week in the podcast, they exist together. And yes, the spiritual world understands us with greater understanding than we understand it, but that doesn't mean we're not two sides of the same coin.
Well, the complementary part of that is the capacity of our understanding of the world is very limited if we live in a world that has that we've cut off from ourselves.
Yes.
So the sleep world, or what we call the unconscious world, or the world of when you're out cold, we don't respect it, even though we spend more than half of our time in that world.
Yes.
We don't respect it, we don't understand it, and we don't talk about it much, except we call it sleep. But it's a much more um, complicated process than that. If it was only to refuel or just to rest yourself so you could continue to be an animal, there is, why would we need to refuel so often? We're like, our batteries are depleted. We are constantly in a state of unconscious. We are constantly fantasizing. We are constantly thinking about things. We are constantly dreaming up different ways and different scenarios in our heads. Um, but Von Franz would say, in the spirit world, it's not really in your head. You're not really in your head. You're in a different world. Your existence is in a different world. These stories show um, the bridge, the closeness between these two worlds,
Yes.
and how that bridge is easily crossed, how we move from one side of the world to the other side, how we all live and we all go into the unconscious realm. We all dream of animals, we all dream of faraway places, of incredible characters. You know, there's quite a few incredible characters. There is the woman who's 9 yards long. Then there's the woman who's 9 yards taller than the woman who's 9 yards long. Then there's a giant that's 27 yards long or tall. And the giant yells in, he basically calls out north, south, east, and west, and calls all the animals, and all the animals come. And then then he does the same thing. He calls out the north, south, west, and east, and all the fish come. So the way we need to think about fairy tales is, these are the stories that we have not really connected to. We have lost touch with the fairy tales. We have lost touch with this world, this incredible, very rich, very vibrant, very beautiful world that helps us connect to the ecology of the planet. It helps us contain our lust to kill every animal alive. It keeps us from destroying the planet and building more and more crap, and just just trashing it, because that's what we are doing. You can't really sleep in a meadow anymore. I mean, you could try, but there is no meadow, that the meadow they're talking about. It's probably like a lush grass. You probably like fall asleep on it, and we don't have those things. We have devastated our planet over the last 100 years. We only have less than 30% of forests left on this planet. But when these fairy tales came out, the planet was covered
Yes.
with forest and animals. It was lush. It was alive. I mean, you could tell, if anybody flies a lot, you could tell by just looking down how much of this planet we have cut down. Just look down when it's takeoff or landing. You go over huge swaths of land, that are completely without any trees, any vegetation that covers them. And this is devastating. It's devastating. Is the planet is devastated. The planet that we rely on to live in, to breathe, to eat, to drink the water of. We have devastated the animals. Most of the animals that are left are animals that we eat. They're domesticated. They're basically food production. They're big bags filled with meat. They're trapped cows in stalls, or chickens in stalls, or they're basically animals for food factory. They're not animals that the native peoples were talking about. They were talking about the animals that lived with us on this planet, that occupied the planet. So I think fairy tales brings us back. I don't know what you two think, but for me, fairy tales brings us back to the devastation that we have caused our planet, and how much that is causing us pain, both physical, mental, and emotional pain, because of people having to move from land that's no longer land that you could plant on, or you have to move away from areas where the storms have gotten so bad that they're destroying the houses and destroying the vegetation, or you have to move because the fires have gotten so bad that, you know, the redwoods in California have been devastated this past summer. They were burning. These are like 500 plus years trees that have lived on this planet 10 lifetimes before we lived on it. They were burned to a crisp. It's devastating. It's devastating that we're leaving a planet that has nothing for the children who are going to come and occupy this planet. We are just caretakers. We forget we're caretakers. We're here for a brief period of time.
Yes, and oftentimes a lot of people express their connection to nature as a way of confirming or affirming their humanity, their compassion, their empathy, their ability to be aware and sense and feel and process and integrate and convene and have solace. All these things that nature and having those places close to us. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just watched a special the other night that was new on Channel 11 PBS from my favorite of all time guy, Sir David Attenborough, who's got to be like 90 years old now. And that's what the whole show was on just a couple of weeks ago. And he said in the last 100 years, we've had about over 500 vertebrate, animals with vertebrae. So these are bigger animals, go extinct.
Now, go extinct. We hunted them out of life.
Well, that's what
I know. There's a couple ways to look at that.
I understand that. Of course, we had the majority of what to do with it. But here's the scary part. Now there's about 500,000 types of animals, that includes insects, and 500,000 types of plants that are now on the verge of extinction because of loss of habitat and hunting.
For sure.
And here's the really scary part for me is that most of modern life in the last 200 years, most of this destruction had been done by Europeans who, gosh, as early as the 1200s. I mean, if you killed a deer in Great Britain, you could be beheaded or hung. That was the king's deer. There was just so few of them. Then Americans came to America in 400 years, wiped out most of the species. They're not extinct, but we pretty much demolished them. There was 100 million buffalo, and at one time it was down to 300. And the people that lived on them, it wasn't just they took away their food, they took away a part of who they were, and
Mm.
and the spirit, the spiritual connection between them. We just, and now what's happened is because the rest of the world is now reaching technological levels that we at Europe and parts of Middle East and others have reached, and parts of Africa have reached in the last 100 years, and now it's spreading all across the world. This attitude that the world is ours to just take and siphon off whatever we want, and it's hastened and sped up the decrease of resources and livestock and animals and all kinds of spiritual things that these fairy tales talk about,
Mm.
pretty close to being out of existence.
Mm. Lisa, you said something. I was trying to.
In regards to what Eric was saying.
The plant animals going extinct. I said we were.
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, animals are going extinct. We are identifying more. We're being even better at identifying, so we're even better at identifying loss.
Mhm.
And numbers are a tricky one to interpret.
Yes, they are.
Well, they are, but the
But
I
no
think
doubt, no doubt, there's a depletion of resources, natural resources, rejuvenation, imbalances, and slaughtering bison. You're not just disconnecting people from the bison; you're disconnecting the life cycle of that land,
right.
of what bison are eating, the things that they trample. Why do they trample it? So these things can grow and suffocate those other things. So there's a balance. There's a whole balance that's been disrupted.
Yes.
Where herds crap on the land, and you have wild grass that grows that feeds other herds that come behind these herds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's we're basically the cycle that helps us all live the life cycle. We have artificially created a cycle that is not sustainable, because the cycle we have created is um, a place where we raise hundreds of millions of animals and slaughter them every year. And it's causing so much havoc on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
If every man, woman, and child on this planet wants to eat meat, we're going to create complete destruction of the planet just by gas alone, by methane gas from the animals that we are creating to eat. And we are creating these animals. I mean, they're not naturally born into, we are multiplying them. I think we like slaughter almost like 500 million animals to eat every year, some crazy insane number.
Mm-hmm.
um
I lament the industrialization as it progresses for generation to generation. Each generation is more disconnected from a growth cycle of what it is to forage, to resource, to conserve, and now that there's a huge disconnect and lack of appreciation for agriculture,
mhm.
farming industries, land use, land protection, and we continue to have the audacity and the lack of humbleness to say that we need to keep our stomachs full all the time.
Yeah.
And there's a lack of respect in our place in the whole.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I think that the hunger comes from the disconnection with the environment, because if you live in the environment, then everybody gets a piece of what the environment carries, or what your environmental footprint is. The problem is when you live in buildings and live in um, apartments and live in cities, and the domestication of animals for food, the slaughter of these animals, um, you don't know what you have in front of you. You don't know where it comes from. It seems like it's an endless supply of burgers. It seems like an endless supply of meat or chicken or birds or whatever it is that you're eating. It seems like it's an endless supply. It was like, you tell a little kid, where do you get your meat? Oh, I go to the grocery store, refrigerate section. It's wrapped in plastic. That disconnect also disconnects us from each other. We become commodities. We become our processes become more interchangeable. Basically, we're just changing things. We're not connecting to anything. We're picking up food because food is in plastic packaging. We don't know where it comes from. We don't care until something bad happens or the food becomes poisonous. Um, when you hear E. coli in spinach or something, or don't eat the spinach or don't eat the lettuce, these problems are occurring because we have taken for granted what the earth does. We're treating it like it's a septic tank, and it's not our septic tank. It's a group process. We feed each other. Our bodies go into the earth. They revitalize and refertilize this planet. We've taken that away. We've taken away the land. We've poisoned the land. In Brazil now, they're burning like thousands of acres a day.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of acres. Like there's no tomorrow. Like the thousand of acres of wood is not going to run out. Like one day you're going to wake up and there's no trees, and everybody's they're selling oxygen masks on the side of the road because you can't breathe. So we forget that
Well, they'll have a lot of bananas or whatever
That's
it is
true.
they're burning it down for, right?
Yes.
They're burning it down to make
And a lot
palm
of
oil.
palm oil.
They're like, yeah.
A lot of palm oil.
I
This is
don't-
one of the problems. One of the problems is that the commercial agriculture has taken up so much land that you don't have animals on that land anymore. You don't have a diversity. You have a diversity issue. That because the animals need diversity in the ecology to feed off of. We forget about that. We start planting the same tree over and over again. In cities where we have like trees more for like um, to decorate than to be practical, to plant more flowers, and we don't see bees anymore. A lot of the things I used to see as a little kid, we don't see anymore. I used to see a ton of frogs. There's no frogs. There's no frogs. Even in the cities, there used to be frogs. There's no frogs. Why aren't there no frogs? Well, they breathe through their skin. We kill them off. They can't grow. It's too contaminated. You'd have to go to places like Florida or places where it's their habitat. But they used to be all over the place. Bugs used to be all over the place. Bugs are gone. I noticed that right away. The plants need you need to fertilize the plants because we don't have bees. The bees are gone.
We can all start sniffing things and we can be pollinators.
Yeah, but we would have to pollinate. Yeah, we'd have to learn how to fly around and pee on everything. Yeah, for sure. No, I mean it's an interesting time because I think we really need to wake up before before there is no more waking up. We sleep in a slumber of everything is going to be there in the morning, and I think this pandemic has proven that it might not be there in the morning. I mean, the pandemic has been bad in so many different ways. On the other hand, the pandemic has been great for other things. The number of miscarriages went down. Preemies, the number of preemies that are born went down. The birds came back. They sing all day. We saw, Sarah saw a coyote walking around the neighborhood. We don't see coyotes around here. The birds are out, the cat, the animals are back. The plant life is growing. And all we had to do was not trample everything in sight for a little bit. But we could have ways of taking care of this planet and making it ours. I think it needs to be taught in school. I think fairy tales need to be taught in elementary school. And I think the stories of the fairy tales, because fairy tales are more moral stories. They're stories about how we should be, how we are connected to each other, and how we're connected to the animals, and how we're connected to the planets, and how we're connected to the water, and how we're connected to the moon. This should be the curriculum for elementary school, because this helps us regain our idea of what it is to live in this planet, to live as part of the planet. They used to teach the cycle of life. Weren't you guys taught the cycle of life in school?
Yes, I even learned Grimm's fairy tales in elementary school.
What about you, Lisa? Did you?
No,
No.
just cycle of life, just on like Lion King level.
Oh, like no,
just like this eats that, this eats that, this eats that kind of thing.
She's much younger than we are. We came from a different time, but no, I don't know. It's when I read these stories, what I think about is our connections.
Mhm.
I have a question, Dr. Lahab.
Yeah.
What the lady that entered carrying the oblong vessel and put it on the floor and then began twirling it like a whirligig. Then she started dancing, and then she turned her back, and it was made manifest that she was hollow. She had no backbones or entrails,
Yes.
only lung and heart.
Yes.
I was kind of trying to understand what that represented.
I'm going to take a stab at this. This is the sun who came in and did this. This is the wife, the sun. And as we know, in the speaking of cycle of life, sun and moon, they are mother, father for life cycles of she is providing energy. So when you see her back, she is exposed. She is not of earth, rocks, and dirt. She is of energy, of circulation, of systems, of movement, of pulsing heart and lungs and breathing lungs. She is energy. Is that? How'd I do? This is my interpretation.
She is the beating heart, right? She is life. That's a symbol of life. It's the beating heart. It's the lungs. It's a symbol of life. It's the thing that we know we're alive when your heart is beating and when you're breathing oxygen. It's the symbol of life. And without the sun, there would be no life. The sun is a major source for life on this planet. If the sun is any closer, there would be no life. If the sun is any further, there would be no life. So the sun's placement, the distance between us and the sun and the way our orbit is, gives us an interaction with the sun that is perfect. We're actually in a perfect space in a lot of ways. We're in a perfect planet that has beautiful air, has great water, has beautiful lands across this planet. There are beautiful places.
Yeah, it's called the Goldilocks zone.
Go on.
No, I was just saying in astronomy, it's called the Goldilocks zone.
Oh yeah, I've never heard that.
Yeah.
And we've now found dozens of other planets, because what have we discovered now? What, 2,000 2,000 other planets now, and dozens of those are believed to be in the Goldilocks zone around that star that they're going around.
Yeah.
So it gives us some hope that there may be other forms of life.
There has to be. There has to be. It's too obnoxious to think that we are the only ones on. We start to sound like Trump if we believe we're the only ones on this, in this cosmos.
Yeah.
It has to be. It makes no. It. It's not scientific to say there's no life out there. It's scientific to say we haven't been able to venture far enough out to find life. But even the life that we're looking for is very minuscule. We're looking for a specific thing that we can measure, that we understand. There is life on this planet that we still don't understand. There's life that lives in the lava we don't understand. There is life that lives in acid we don't understand.
Yeah. And in sub-zero temperatures in the Arctic and Antarctic.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're called extremophiles.
Yeah. And we have viruses that have been frozen and bacteria that have been frozen over 500,000 years. We don't understand how they melt and come back to life. They don't die. We have many things that we cannot adequately explain, but we want to look for life in similar ways that we know what life is on this planet. But we haven't taken care of this planet. We have definitely not taken care of this planet. We have not taken care of ourselves. We have not taken care of our neighbors. We have lost our way as humans, or humanity on this planet has lost its way. We've become too caught up in creature comforts, and that's it. We acquire creature comforts and we grow old and die. We don't. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. The more I read, the more we're going to get into this book. I think the more we read these fairy tales, the more they're going to connect us to the things that we actually need, that we've somehow forgotten about, that we've lost, that we didn't take too seriously. You know, watching a process of how your meat gets to your table is very important. You might either stop eating meat or you might appreciate it a lot more. But even
that's not a fun show to watch.
No, it's a difficult issue, because we have to know there's a price for everything, right? When Young talks about that, the spirit world and the profane world are complementary to each other, so are we to everything else. When we do not complement this planet, we're basically having a free ride, and there is no free ride. Everything has a price. We dig into this planet, we burn fossil fuels, there's a price. We don't change the way we behave towards our trees and our wildlife, there's a price. And we have seen it over and over again. We have seen it. But we are the dominant species on this planet. And we have done things to this planet that people would be charged with crimes for and sent away for a very, very long time. Anyway, not to get too depressing. These are the stories that we're talking about. We're talking about fairy tales. So with that, any thoughts, Eric, Lisa?
Yeah, if you got a pet, go hug your pet tonight.
Oh, yes.
Go hug a tree.
Go hug a tree. Yeah.
You know, in one of the
Go for a
books,
walk.
in one of the books that we just read, I think it was Whitmont's book. He talked about how trees, how they're such living entities that in one part of a forest, if a group of trees is infested with a particular type of disease or organism that starts killing it, trees that are in other parts of the forest that have no connection to it at all start putting out, for lack of a better way of saying it, they start putting out antibodies against what's destroying the trees on the other side of the forest.
Ooh.
This is an incredible thing. These things are living entities.
Yes. And they take care of each other first.
They do.
So the same type of trees will take care of each other, then take care of the other trees around them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the energy flows through all of them, and they spread out their roots to help somebody. So if another tree is ill, they'll spread their roots to save it, like a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah,
That we don't think about. You know, things that we don't necessarily think about. Things that I was watching that. I don't know if you seen these shows that they put on Netflix, but they're about birds and animals at night and what they do. And fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Fascinating. They have social lives. They have like connections. They have neighbors. They have enemies. They compete against each other. I mean,
They have feelings.
yes. Okay, so next week we have chapter 3 is the hole in the earth, the sky hole, and the cave. And chapter 4 is the well. So we will do chapter 3 and chapter 4 next week.
Sounds good.
I think that's enough. So Lisa, Eric, you, Lisa, take the hole in the earth, the sky hole, and the cave. And Eric, you read the well.
Yes, sir.
And then we will discuss. And next week we'll discuss more of the symbolism of our connections to these magical things.
Sounds good.
I am Dr. Lahab El Samurai. This is the IFC's Individuation Podcast. With me are Dr. Eric Tomlinson and Lisa Hong.
Hi.
And they have contributed to our discussion today by reading 2 fairy tales. Next week, we will return to more fairy tales. We look forward to talking to all of you about what we have read and thought about. Dr. Tomlinson, do you want to say goodbye to the group?
Farewell, my people.
Miss Hong, would you like to say goodbye to?
Thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Take care, everybody, and we will talk to you next week.